Hello everyone. Today I would like to address a session on interview techniques and communication skills. In fact, there are two topics. So first I would like to speak on interview techniques, followed by my address on communication skills. Now, broadly speaking, we all know that interview is a conversation between two or more individuals. Now, there could be different types of interviews. Here, I would be specifically restricting my talk on job interviews. Now, in a job interview, one would be the interviewee, that is the candidate, and the other would be the interviewer. So, why I said that it could be between two or more persons, if the setting includes the interviewer and the interviewee, obviously then persons are two. However, the interviewee will be one, the interviewer, if there are many, that is why I said it could be between two or many persons. So now we know what is a job interview like. It is a conversation between the interviewee and the interviewer, or whichever way it can be said, between the interviewer and the interviewee, or interviewers and interviewee. Now, have you ever pondered or have you ever thought that why certain people are successful in an interview while others they are not? The crux lies in preparing oneself well for the interview. Now, how to prepare oneself well for the interview, that is what I would like to speak on by what is meant by interview techniques. Fundamentally speaking, there are 8 guiding principles in order to make an interview successful, both for the interviewer as well as for the interviewee. The first is, so I'll come chronologically. I'll start with point number 1, that is tips for effective interview or interview techniques. So point number 1 that I would like to mention is the opening of the interview. Now here, the opening of the interview could be or could vary between two extremes. That is, one type of opening could be forceful and confident, while the other type of interview could be timid with a low tone. Naturally, you will all agree that the approach that would be ideal would be when the opening is forceful and confident. Now, mind you, here the opening does not always mean when the interviewee starts talking. It begins with the interviewee actually knocking on the door, entering the room if asked to enter, then sitting at the allotted seat if asked to sit. These are all components of opening. So all these things should be carefully kept in mind by the interviewee so as to make the opening effective. And confident and forceful means the interviewee should look uh, confident, that is assertive, and should look forceful. Forceful here, I mean the opposite of timid. That means not weak. Should give an impression that the interviewee is at ease. So this is what I mean by the opening of the interview to be forceful and confident. Point number 1. Point number 2 is preparation of the text. Here the text is, I mean the script. Now here again there might be raised eyebrows that in an interview, what could be the script or what could be the text? What I actually mean is that there are always certain preempted interview questions. So the answers to those questions should be prepared in advance and should be practiced, should be rehearsed well before the D-Day. That means before the actual interview day and before the actual interview. So that is what I mean by preparation of the text or preparation of the script. So there are always certain common questions like tell me something about yourself, or tell us something about yourself, or what do you know about our company, or what do you know about the job, have you done some research about our organization or about the job. So all this relate to what I mean by script or text. So this should be prepared in advance, and this should be rehearsed and practiced. So first, as I said, I recap. That is, first is the opening of the interview. Second is preparation of the text or script. Now I come in chronological order. The third point, that is what is known as smooth delivery. That means while I am talking, while I am opening my script, that means while I am answering a particular question, the delivery should be smooth. So smooth delivery without unnecessary pauses at the speed in which normal conversation is usually carried out. Because if there are certain unnecessary pauses, the interviewer might get an impression or might get a feel that the interviewee is not very confident, is diffident, is not very assertive, or is not very sure about what he or she is saying. So the third point, as I said, is smooth delivery without unnecessary pauses at the speed in which normal conversation is usually carried out. The fourth point is, in an interview, the interviewee should display relaxed posture with cheerful facial expression. See, certain amount of tension will always be there. But what I mean to say that if there is excess of tension, excess of nervousness, it would adversely affect the outcome of the interview. So the posture should be relaxed, the body language should be relaxed, and the face should be cheerful, chirpy. So the interviewer or the interviewers will understand that the interview is absolutely relaxed, is absolutely comfortable, not in the stress zone, not in the panic zone, but in the comfort zone. So that is what I mean by, as I said, that is relaxed posture with cheerful facial expression. The next point is voice modulation. Now, voice modulation is the intonation part. Sometimes raising the voice, sometimes lowering the pitch, so that it does not look monotonous, it does not sound aggressive, and it sounds like smooth conversation or a smooth communication. So that is what I mean by voice modulation. The intonation, the low pitch and the high pitch should be effectively modulated. So I repeat, the first is the opening of the interview. The second is the preparation of the text. The third is the smooth delivery without unnecessary pauses at the speed in which normal conversation is usually carried out. Fourth is relaxed posture with cheerful facial expression. And the fifth is voice modulation. Now, in a product or a service situation, we call something or we mention something called USP, unique selling proposition. Now, when it comes to an the interviewer is essentially looking for what is known as UBP from the interviewee. Now, what is UBP? UBP stands for unique buying proposition. So, unique buying proposition, the interviewer must get a feel that if I take this candidate, the UBPs will be more, unique buying propositions will be more. So, this is in contrast with unique selling proposition of a product or service. So, here unique buying proposition, what I come back again related to the voice modulation part, the voice modulation should be such that with emphasis on the UBPs, sometimes raising, sometimes lowering, so that it looks or sounds very impressive. Next is the eye contact. This is very important. You see, body language, verbal and non-verbal. Body language is only one part of non-verbal communication. This I'll talk to when I talk on communication. But there are other parts also of non-verbal communication. But what I mean to say at this point, that the verbal communication and the non-verbal communication in an interview setting should always go hand in hand. If my non-verbal communication differs with my verbal communication, then the interviewer is always likely to believe my NVC, non-verbal communication, rather than what I'm saying, that is the verbal communication. So eye contact will help to establish that. Eye contact between the interviewee and the interviewer, or between the interviewee or different interviewers, equitably spread across. So once it is maintained, eye contact, it will ensure that what I'm saying, actually I'm meaning that. So verbal and non-verbal communication will be in tandem. Next is effective use of documents. I need to carry, or an interviewee need to carry his or her resume or his or her testimonials. So, to one's advantage, the interviewee must try to chip in those documents, those testimonials, so that the interviewer can get a chance or get an opportunity, or a situation is created whereby the interviewer even has a cursory look or even has a rapid look to all those documents. That will amount to third party evidence working in the interviewee's favor. Third party means the testimonials. Third party means the documents. Third party means the resume. So this is what I mean by, that is the effective use of the documents. And the final point is, what I would like to mention is the effective closing. The effective closing should be such that the interviewee should never give up. Even if a question, the answer to that is not known, the interviewee, rather than playing defensive and rather than appearing subjugated or very docile, can smartly say that, please excuse me, I would like to take the next question. So in that case, the closing part, or the communication part, sounds very positive. So in a situation, in a real work situation, the interviewer will also preempt, will also understand that this person will never be taken for a ride, or this person, the interviewer, will never be caught on the wrong footing, will always be able to answer smartly. So that is what I mean by effective closing. So I would like to come full circle to the 8 points for effective interview or interview techniques. The first is the opening of the interview. Second is the preparation of the text or the script. Third is smooth delivery without unnecessary pauses at the speed in which normal conversation is usually carried out. Fourth is relaxed posture with cheerful facial expression. Fifth is voice modulation with emphasis on UBPs, unique buying proposition. Sixth is eye contact. Seventh is effective use of materials, documents, CVs, testimonials, etc. And eighth is effective closing. Given these 8 points, if the interviewee maintains, it is all the most likely that the outcome of the interview will be a win-win situation both for the interviewee as well as for the interviewer. I pause at this stage so far as interview techniques are concerned. Now I come to my communication skills part. Now we all know that communication is nothing but it is an exchange of ideas, information, messages between two or more persons. Now, as it says, or it has been found out through a typical research, that 70 to 80% of our waking time is spent on communication. And researchers have also gone to the extent of segregating that. Out of this, we speak around 30% of our time. We listen, which is very important. Listening, we listen around 45% of our time. We read around 16% of our time, and we write around 9% of our time. So 30, 45, that's 75 plus 16 plus 9 brings us to 100%. So this is the split up, or this is the breakup of an entire communication exercise. Now here I'm talking of the speaking part in terms of communication. See, normally we have a fallacy or there is a myth that people who are fluent or people who speak eloquently, they are good communicators. There is no doubt on that. But what is important is at the end of the communication, both the sender and the receiver, that is both the communicator and the communicatee, should see eye to eye. That means they should be on the same page. In other words, what I mean is the communicatee or that means the receiver should get a feel that the communicator is convincing, is persuasive. So his or her communication should be such that it is persuasive, it is convincing. There might be one or two gaps in the fluency. There should not be, but if there is, no problem. The way one communicates should be such that it is convincing, it is persuasive. Then only it will lead to commonness between the communicator and the communicatee. Because it says that communication is derived from the Latin word communis, which means commonness or closeness. So at the end of the communication, the objective should lie in the communicator and the communicatee, that is the sender and the receiver, seeing eye to eye with each other. Having said that, again, in communication, there are, to remember very crisply, there are 8 principles of effective communication. If one maintains that, then obviously the communication will be effective. And this 8 can again be termed as the cardinal principles of communication skills. What are then these 8 points? First is principle of clarity. Whatever the person speaks, that means the communicator speaks, should be clear. There should not be any confusion. There should not be any ambivalence. It should not mean this or that. It should be very specific. So principle of clarity. Second is principle of brevity. Here brevity comes from the word brief. So the communication should be brief. So principle of brevity. Third is principle of timeliness. The communicator should know what to speak when. So that is principle of timeliness. Fourth is principle of informality. Obviously, there is an element of formality in an official setting, but too much of formality will lead nowhere. So at times, effective use of humor, related humor, will make the environment informal. So that is what I mean by principle of informality. Next is principle of economy, where simple communication can be undertaken through a telephone. There is no need of sending a courier or sending a mail. Principle of economy in all aspects. Next is principle of integration. Sometimes we tend to speak in bits and pieces, but at the end of the communication, the communicator should integrate, should dovetail all what he or she has spoken. At this time, I am reminded of one of my professors so many decades back. He used to come to class, he used to teach us marketing, and he used to tell, in the next 90 minutes, I would like to speak on this. In that way, he used to maintain principle of clarity. He used to maintain principle of brevity. In fact, principle of informality also. He was very chirpy, very humorous. But what I mean is principle of integration. At the end of the class, he used to integrate what he had spoken in the 90 minutes by saying, this is what I told you in the last 90 minutes. So it looks like a cogent, it looks like a cohesive whole, it looks like an integrated whole. So that is principle of integration. Then we have what is known as principle of feedback. See, sometimes the communicator should ask the communicatee, the sender should ask the receiver, can you please repeat what I told you just now? In the process, the communicator will understand whether his communication has gone effectively or whether his or her communication has gone haywire. So that is what is known as principle of, as I said, feedback. So now, before I come to the wrap up, let me see how many principles we have covered. So first is principle of clarity. Second is principle of brevity. In any order, there is no sequence here. Next is, as I said, principle of timeliness. Next is principle of informality. Next is principle of economy. Next is principle of integration. Next is principle of, as I said, feedback. That brings us to the last principle, that is the eighth principle. That is what is known as principle of tapping the relevant memory system. Now, what I mean by this, the authors say that there are three types of memory system. One is focusing on the experience or experiment, the experimental focus or the experiential focus. The other is the procedural focus, and the third is the structural focus. So what is the experimental or the experiential focus? By pitching in anecdotes, again relevant anecdotes, the communication can be made very simple, understandable by the listeners. That is principle of tapping the relevant memory system. Here, what is that relevant system? It is the experiential focus or the experimental focus. Here, experience or experiment relates to that anecdote. Second is, or whichever order, as I said, two more in that last 8th point, principle of tapping the relevant memory system, the structural focus. So what is structural focus? Suppose I have to say something, I can think that in the form of a mnemonic. For example, in a planning class or in an objective setting class, if I talk of many things, I may get confused. But if I remember a mnemonic, which is known as SMART, then the structural focus, that structure will prevent me from going haywire. So then I know SMART refers to S for specific, M for measurable, A for agreed, R for realistic, T for time bound. So when I use certain mnemonics, I can definitely, in terms of my communication, maintain the structural focus. It will help the communicatee or the listeners to remember that in the form of a flow chart, in the form of a structure. And the last subset of the principle of tapping the relevant memory system is procedural focus. So what is procedural focus? By actually demonstrating. See, I can tell volumes on how to drive a car, or I can tell volumes on how to ride a bicycle. But at the end of the exercise, if the receiver or the communicatee tells me that, sir, by now I have understood everything on how to ride a bicycle, only thing I am yet to learn is the art of balancing. Now that can only happen by using the procedural focus. That here what I mean by staging a role play, giving a demo, then the other person, the listener, will be able to grasp that is how it should be converted or translated into action. So I have mentioned the 8 principles of effective communication. Before I wrap up, I would like to mention that communication skills would also include certain things like preventing certain barriers to effective communication. And what are these barriers? Primarily, there are 4. First is semantic barrier. That means language. Whatever I say should be very simple. Semantics means language. So it should not use technical language, or it should not use over verbosity, or it should not involve jargon. So principle of, it is actually a principle that means in simple terms which everybody can understand. So that is semantic barrier should be avoided. The second is emotional barrier or psychological barrier. That means while communicating, either speaking or listening, I must have a concentrated or a focused mind. In a very lighter vein, if I'm communicating something to someone and if the other person's mind is blocked in some other things, the communication will not be effective. For example, I'm talking to a young student, male or female, and the student is thinking about his or her fiancé. So that means the communicator or the receiver is having a blocked mind. So no matter how effective I am in the other principles of the other parts, those things will not augur well. Because here what is defeated is, or what comes in, is that emotional barrier or psychological barrier. Psychological barrier or emotional barrier can take another form. For example, distrust in communicator. Suppose I'm listening to someone, I should have that feeling or that belief that is the person from whom I'm hearing whatever he or she is telling is correct, at least to the maximum possible extent. If I do not believe that, if I have distrust in the communicator, communication will not be effective. So one, as I said, that is semantic barrier. The other, that is emotional or psychological barrier. The third is physical barrier. This physical barrier relates to proxemics, that is space language. So I should know intimate space, private space, public space, social space, and accordingly I should position myself within that appropriate space, considering the appropriate communicatee, considering who is my receiver. That is what I mean by principle of, that is proxemics, or the physical distance. So that is, again I come back by way of recap. One is the semantic barrier, the other is the psychological or emotional barrier, the other is the physical barrier, and the last is the mechanical barrier. So what is the mechanical barrier? When I'm speaking, there should not be noise. Acoustics should be proper. There should not be interference by way of, for example, in a setting, I'm talking, there are pillars which obstructs the view between the communicator and the communicatee, things can go haywire. So mechanical barrier, apart from noise, etc., would relate to the entire environment so that the communication can take place in an effective setting. This, if I maintain, that means if I preclude or if I avoid these four barriers, then communication in all likelihood will be effective. And at the end of the communication, by eliminating those four barriers and by maintaining those 8 principles, the communication will be effective between the communicator and the communicatee. If you have any further questions, please go to Globsyn Business School online. For ready reference, in Globsyn, we have a separate subject called soft skills and communication skills. Soft skills and communication skills. In that subject, a specialist delivers classes on soft skills and communication skills. So, soft skills and communication skills, we take this very seriously in Globsyn. So nice addressing you all on interview techniques and communication skills. As I said, for any further queries, please refer back to Globsyn Business School online. Pleasure talking. Thank you.